Welcome to the University of Leeds. Here we are in September 2025. This lecture, I'm going to begin it with a brief overview, just to give you an idea what to expect. As most of you will know, one of the most important tasks of social science research is to investigate the potential effects of policies and programs. And the method which we all know, through which you do this is called evaluation research, or more widely, evidence-based policy. What I'm going to do is do a methodological history of evaluation research. Hopefully a methodological history in about 45 minutes. And that history is going to start with the high optimism of the 1950s, moving gradually through the paradigm wars of the 80s and 90s, moving through what's called the complexity agenda, and ending in the present, and in fact pushing into the future. And hopefully we've got a happy ending there, an optimistic note to end on. As with most historical presentations, I can't resist this idea of the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of history. So I'm going to borrow that very conventional trope that you'll find everywhere. So if epic poems are your things, Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Or if you're from these parts of the world, you might know it better as Chumbawamba's I get knocked down, but I get up again. So that's the kind of rhythm to expect of the presentation. Two just little notes by way of introduction. The first is this is very much a personal history. I doubt whether many people in the audience will agree with it, certainly not every word of it. And I should say I took part in some of these debates myself, so I was a little part in that history, but I'm old, but I don't go back to the 1950s, and so some of that is my reading of the documentation. The second note is that there is one very basic theme of the lecture, the very basic historical trajectory I'm going to talk about, and that is a difference in the basic objective of evaluation research. Evaluation research has gradually changed from the idea of delivering a verdict on a program to one of explaining how the differential effectiveness of the program. So the subtitle, if you like, is From Verdicts to Explanations. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning, and the beginning of evaluation is normally traced to what's called the Great Society period in North America in that post-war period, 50s and 60s. And why evaluation began was because of the Great Society core idea, which was that a massive set of domestic programs would be launched aimed at addressing all kinds of inequalities in education, racial access, healthcare delivery, pay and taxation systems, so quite all across the policy waterfront. And I should also say it was a time of great optimism. So if you read the literature at that stage, and like perhaps what you get now, you get that sense of optimism in the very core of evaluation research. The Great Society period created the What Works agenda, the verdict business. So each of those individual programs was put out a research, and the valiant and important aim was to try to identify just the effective interventions. And the research method, I won't go into in detail, was basically based on trial methodology, more normally a quasi-experimental comparison of program on and program off. So there was the What Works agenda. It was pushed a little bit further in North America, creating what are called research and evaluation clearinghouses. Now, these were bodies with regulatory powers, and the idea was that after they'd pulled together the evidence, then they would actually accredit just the effective interventions. And they pulled together the interventions known as meta-analysis. Now, I have to the best of my knowledge, these research and evaluation clearinghouses only ever existed in America. There's no equivalent, I think, of in Europe and indeed the rest of the world. Those of you will know that the Campbell and Cochrane collaborations attempt something similar, but don't have any formal authority at all. The slide ends with just a glimpse at an election poster of the time, and you see that great motif, the Great Society. You might like to compare it with present-day notions of the Great Society, but dear audience, I leave that to you. Okay, so we move now to the 80s and the 90s, and what I see as the first doubts emerging about evaluation's ability to distinguish winners from losers. And I give you two just tiny little examples. First is that all of this amassed research often ended in dispute, disagreement, rather than a clear verdict. And my best example of that is the famous Head Start programs, known variously throughout the world as compensatory education, early years education, Sure Start, and so on. And if you read the literature there, you'll find that after all of that research effort, there's still disagreement. And why is because Head Start can be shown to work or fail along several quite different dimensions. So it can be shown to work or fail according to the measures that you choose to assess effectiveness. Do you use basically educational measures or behavioral measures or attitudinal measures? The results vary according to which measure you've chosen. They vary massively according to the population assigned to the program. So disadvantaged groups coming in all shapes and sizes, and quite different groups have gone through the programs. I remember reading to my horror that one program says that Sure Head Start was aimed at the mentally deficient. News to me. Third difficulty is there are quite different variations in program philosophy. Some taught through something near a formal education, some were much more play-based, and variations followed from that. The implementation of Head Start was done in quite different ways. Intensive programs, occasional programs, occasionally watching Sesame Street, and according to the implementation, you got different results. And finally, variations follow from the responsible authorities. There are some formally accredited Head Start programs and some based in more informal settings. So put all of those together, and after all of these years, we end in dispute, disagreement, rather than verdict. And that what I've talked about there applies to an awful lot of programs. Another early doubt was Ross's famous iron law of evaluation. Now, Peter Rossi is an extraordinarily clever evaluator, brilliant sociologist, and he wrote this small set of papers, one of which is the iron law of evaluation. So what he argues is that the expected value of any net impact assessment of any large-scale program is 0. In other words, if you have a program and you roll it out and you keep rolling it out, one should expect its impact to descend to 0 or near 0. I'm not going to explain exactly his reasoning here. I'd strongly recommend you to read this 1987 paper. And in fact, the reasons for his pessimism are going to be borne out in the rest of the lecture. So we move on a little bit to the present, 1990s, right up to date, where evaluation's been dominated by what I call the complexity agenda, which is a different understanding of the nature of social programs and their place in society. I've tried to capture that in a single sentence, which I read. Programs are complex, adaptive, self-transformational systems inserted into institutions or services or societies, which are also complex, adaptive, and self-transformative institutions. And it's the self-transformative bit which is really rather important. In the early days, there was an expectation that you should only evaluate programs that are perfectly reducible, and they should have implementation fidelity. In other words, they should basically be the same and be delivered in the same way. Now, think about that for a moment. I think it's nonsense. Think about it from the view of a practitioner. When they turn up for work on a Monday morning, they're not going to say, "Right, folks, let's churn it out again." They're going to be dealing with problems. They're going to be firefighting, or they might be just trying to improve the program. And there's no way that you can stop that self-transformation occurring. As to the situations and societies and institutions in which programs are inserted, well, hey, look around you. Everything is changing. In your institution, things are changing all of the time. So you have no control over that. So the modern realization is that programs and policies, their effects are better thought of as system states. There's a little reference there to a great paper by David Byrne. What that's saying is, and again I read this because I'm trying to be careful and precise here. So interventions introduce resources of different kinds into a system. And these resources both change the system, but the system itself changes the components, it changes the program. So effects emerge only after this rather complicated journey through the entirety of a system. There's a little ball of wool diagram there that might encourage you to think of in that way, and definitely not think in the way that programs are normally portrayed in terms of independent variables and dependent variables and causal arrows going like that. So we come to the idea that in interventions or the program effectiveness depends on an interaction of many system components. What are those system components? And I attempt that again in a little passage that I'll read out. And dear audience, I want you to remember every word of this. So, but what I'm arguing basically is we no longer can ask what works. What we've got to do is to deal with this rather formidable sentence. What is it about a program that works, for whom, in what circumstances, in what respects, with what resources, at what cost, with what political public support, with what sustainability, designed and funded by whom, implemented by whom, in the presence of other programs and reforms, etc. So put that in your noddle and remember it. So if you've accepted the arguments about complexity, I'm afraid that means that we bid farewell to the accreditation model. If the effectiveness of interventions depends on this whole system of interacting components, interacting conditions, what does that mean? Now, I summarize that by saying that conventional evaluation research is a leaky bucket. Think of each of evaluation quite possibly valuable, but it will leak, it will miss things out. And I try to capture that in that series of bullet points. So in other words, no single evaluation can capture all of the aforementioned conditions in that rather long sentence. I know of no evaluation that's ever covered that lot, and to do so would require permanent omni-surveillance, which evaluation can't deal with. That doesn't mean that single evaluations are not useful. In fact, they are useful. But the point is that they always inevitably provide partial accounts of why a program might fail or succeed. It will answer some questions, but always leave others behind. And that limitation applies to whatever method you're using. Theories of change, realist evaluation, experimental evaluation, and so on. There's always a limit to the explanations it can provide. So here's the big deal. So the results from any single case study, there's no reason why they should apply to others of the same program. So the other implementations of the same program will inevitably carry out a different configuration of all of those system elements. So basically, the simple truth is this: there are no lasting verdicts to be had. We can't say this program works and this one doesn't, because there is no way that you can pronounce that verdict. And on that basis, I bid farewell to the accreditation model. Right, we go back a bit, back to the 1950s, and because there's another problem with the great tradition of evaluation, and that concerns the way it's commissioned. And basically, evaluation research is commissioned in a way that no other body of scientific research is commissioned. And the research funding model, to put it succinctly, is this: evaluation is for hire. So what happens in the commissioning of research, and it's remained unchanged from 1950s, is that a key agency will launch a program, one after the other, with the absolute stock requirement and the funding to go with it, that each single piece of evaluation should be put out to evaluation. So in other words, we have a one intervention, one evaluation model. And that's been roundly criticised. And I mentioned a few of these merely in passing. It means that inconsistent methods are applied. It means that evaluation is based on soft money. It introduces the cash nexus. You pay for what you get. Evaluation normally takes place over rather short time frames, and so on and so on. All of those problems are well known. And what I want to point out is this: the key problem, that inquiry becomes atomized. Each evaluation starts from scratch. So each single evaluation is in a sense independent. So the evidence base consists of literally thousands of disconnected studies with little mutual learning going on. So to put it another way, studies run in parallel rather than sequentially. And I've got a little diagram to try and illustrate that. And I do this for evaluation practitioners because they will all know about Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is this idea: you gain an evaluation commission, you spill blood doing it, you get to your final report, and before you've got time to use it, to spread the word, etc., along comes another invitation to tender, and you launch yourself into another evaluation. So the commissioning model is very important to the potential of evaluation research. So here's a summary of my summary of evaluation founding models. Put those two difficulties together, the leaky bucket and Groundhog Day, and you have something like a Babel of chaotic voices. Some of you will know the Babel myth, where the people of God try to build this monument going to heaven. God takes against the people and makes them speak different languages, and they fail to understand each other. I think it's not a bad characterization of much of evaluation. Lots of people failing to understand each other. Okay, so we reached the second part of the lecture, which is about a future agenda for evaluation research. And on the little list you see before me, to one side of me, you'll see what this agenda is in a little bit more detail. Now, the first thing is to try and crack this problem of making evaluation a cumulative science. So rather than thousands of discrete inquiries, how can we link them together? One challenge. The next thing is that we should change the priority of evaluation from programs to program theory, and in that way we can abolish some of the evaluation silos. The next thing I think it's undergoing already is that we should do more research synthesis over one-off evaluation studies. The next one, shift resources from ex post to ex ante. Do the evaluation before rather than after. The next one is to widen the focus of evaluation from this very narrow emphasis on something we call programs to the whole policy apparatus. And the next one is, what about a more historical focus? Evaluation is fixed in the present. Looking back through programs over time can provide lots of valuable information. And finally, and most ambitiously, what about wicked problems? Problems that have proved completely insoluble. I think we should have a go at those as well. This next slide is an attempt at the big problem, how to make research cumulative. And I think it's very instructive to look at how science accumulates. How is it organized in the way that knowledge progresses, knowledge accumulates? Much has been written about this, most notably by Popper, and he sees science as a progressive program of error elimination. So earlier research, say we're dealing with a puzzle, what is gravity? And if you look at the historical sequence of research, you get the first piece of research makes some headway on that issue, some headway on attempting to answer the question, but it leaves many gaps, leaves behind errors, leaves behind unknown. But the next piece of research starts on the basis of what we already know and moves on from that, developing knowledge a little bit further, but also leaving behind errors, also leaving behind unknowns. And it's that sequence of steps through which science progresses. So in figure 1 there, I try to capture that, and if you want to know more about that, go and read a little bit of Popper. Compare figure 1 with figure 2, which is about evaluation research, as previously described, with those thousands of disconnected studies with little learning going on between them. So there, in a couple of pictures, is the big prize. How can we organise evaluation research so it looks more like the Popperian figure 1 rather than the row of Smarties as in figure 2? And we plunge on to see how that's done in the next slides. The first idea, and I start with another little quibble about evaluation research, is that it really takes place in silos. So people do the evaluation of criminal justice or education or healthcare or environmental evaluation. They don't speak to each other. The discrimination is probably even smaller than that. So people doing crime prevention as opposed to sentencing policy say, they don't speak to each other. My solution to that is to stop imagining that all programs are unique, because they have surprising similarities. And so I put that like this. Due to the narrow imagination of policymakers and their limited resources, variants of the same program idea are tried and tried again. Apologies if you are a policymaker. Didn't really mean that you have a narrow imagination. I just meant that your options are rather limited. So what I'm basically saying there is that programs carry the same idea. Now, my best example of that, and here's another thing that you should read if you've not read it already, is a book and papers within it. The book's called Carrots, Sticks and Sermons, and rather heroically, and with much exaggeration, it says there are only 3 types of policies. Policymakers apply carrots or sticks or sermons. Carrots means incentives. And incentivization theory crosses all of the policy areas. So I produce a list there. So in the UK now and in the past, there are dozens of programs that work basically by trying to encourage and incentivize people by offering a little bonus or a discount. So there are, just to read the slide a little bit, insulating homes, improving security, quitting smoking, increasing waste recycling, joining educational provision, independent living for disabled people. They all work by trying to introduce a little incentive to get people going in those areas. Now, if we'd abolished the evaluations, we'd know that there was something rather common to them all, and it's a problem with targeting. All incentive programs have a problem with getting the right people involved. So the incentives often fail to reach the people that are so entitled, and they often suffer malicious attempts of people that are not entitled to try and benefit. And so that entitlement problem runs across all of the examples that I talked about. So what we need is something different. Instead of these separate programs, we need to address the entitlement problem. Can we make sure that it reaches the right people and not the wrong people? And you could do that with a comparative analysis across all of those domains. So if you're looking for a PhD subject, I would recommend that. A comparative assessment of the entitlement problems. Of course, you wouldn't get funding to do it because the funding operates in silos. So it's for a PhD student to do this. The next one is something that's happening already. Research synthesis is becoming more and more important and popular. I want to go even further than that and say synthesis should be the priority. Synthesis should come first. And why synthesis is important is it's this antidote to Groundhog Day. So programs are always variants of something that's happened before. There's nothing new under the sun in the world of policy making. So policy making is about the constant repackaging of similar ideas. The little diagram there attempts to explain this. So any program, any policy is actually composed of a package of ideas. And it's quite possible to look at that package in terms of its jigsaw of components. And so find research on the first piece of the jigsaw, the second, and so on. And synthesis is about bringing them all together. Let's have a closer look at the diagram, which is perhaps a better explanation of what I'm trying to say here. Any program is actually composed of a package of ideas, and all of those ideas will have been encountered and tried out previously. So what you can do in synthesis is to look at previous evidence, not on the program at all, but on each individual package of ideas. And if you bring all of those discrete pieces of evidence together, synthesize them, then you have the basis for some future implementation advice. Let me do a very brief example, if I may, of some research I did with Jeff Wong. And it was about a program that hadn't taken place, potential legislation banning smoking in cars carrying children. And what we did was to synthesize the evidence before that program, before that legislation had actually been put in place in the UK. And we did it via the jigsaw idea. So the pieces of the jigsaw in that case were evidence on the toxicity involved in the backseat of a car, evidence on the potential public approval for such legislation, evidence on what smokers felt about that legislation, evidence about what the tobacco companies felt about that legislation, and evidence from the police and enforcement officers about whether banning smoking in cars carrying children was feasible from their point of view. All of those separate pieces of evidence were synthesized, and we ended up with some implementation advice. Next recommendation is to shift from what's called ex post to ex ante evaluation, doing the evaluation before rather than after the program. Now, I remember going to a conference 20, 30 years ago when someone spoke very passionately for the idea of ex ante evaluation. And I thought at the time, as did most of the audience, how on earth can you do an evaluation before something's happened? And it is difficult. And the first bit of this slide tells you why it's difficult. It's the way that social programs are mounted. They're rather febrile. So what happens is there's some crisis, some failure. Political leadership says, we must do something, but the actual responsibility for passing over what we must do goes through program managers and program practitioners. So the program is never set out in detail. It's settled on the hoof. And therefore, ex-ante consideration is difficult, it's limited. But I think there is a better model, and you can imagine them as thought experiments. So by theorizing and thinking and brainstorm through a potential program, you can begin to do this ex-ante evaluation. There are some formal names for it. They're called scoping studies, front-end analysis, select committee scrutiny, scenario building. And for my example, I'd use something that happens in the UK called select committee scrutiny. And basically what happened is that any potential law is set down in a great deal of detail. Its assumptions are set down literally clause by clause. And that potential legislation is put before something called a select committee. The select committee does this thought experiment on it, pointing out potential flaws, potential omissions, potential and unintended consequences, and then puts them back to the legislator, and then the legislator is in the UK required to amend and take into consideration the suggestion of the select committee. Now, what if we could organise evaluation research in a way like that? What it requires, and this is a big ask, is for programme architects to lay down their ideas in much greater detail than they do now. Literally, they should have this clause by clause structure. The next great plan for the future is this one, to widen the focus from programs to the whole policy operation. Now, at the moment, evaluation research is too closely aligned with program evaluation. You might notice I use the American spelling there. Why? Because evaluation research, as I pointed out many minutes ago, was born in the American system, the Great Society system, where policy was delivered just through programs. But ask any policy analysis what it analyse what it consists of, and they will come up with this great list I've highlighted in red there. Policy is about regulation, it's about legislation, it's about tribunals, it's about management reforms, it's about public inquiries, it's about fiscal instruments, it's about capacity building, it's about inspection, it's about franchising. All of those things are not programs, but they're just as interesting, they're potentially more powerful, but my point is that they yield to the same complex system analysis that I've described all the way through. So you can say of them what works for whom, in what circumstances, in what respects, at what condition, at what costs, etc., etc. You can ask exactly the same set of questions, and the research method is exactly the same. You lay out the theory in great detail, and you test the assumptions. Time perhaps for a quick example. In the UK, whenever there's a crisis or a catastrophe, it's normally put to a public inquiry. And what we need to understand is the theory of public inquiries. And public inquiries are inquisitorial. Basically, they comb through all of the evidence, assembled from lots of different perspectives. Now that produces an immediate and instant clash with those who've suffered from the catastrophe or cock-up in question, because what they want is something much more like an adversarial system. So you have that immediate clash of program theories, inquisitorial versus adversarial. And in any public inquiry you care to think of, that interplay is the thing that needs to be inspected. Coming towards the end of these new ideas, this is something that I'm also very keen on. Evaluation doesn't employ historical methods. It doesn't look into successive reforms. It doesn't look into the past in order to gain information about the future. Why should that be the case? I'm not sure, because if you look at what key policy agencies do, they grapple with the same problem over and over again, and they make endless corrections, recorrections, sometimes overcorrections. And what happens through history isn't the high road to progress. It's this rather jerky succession of successes and failures. And looking at those over time is incredibly instructive. And I think what we should do in particular areas, welfare reform, welfare payments, they're constantly adjusted. Something like sentencing policy, waves over time. Nearly all health service reorganisations end up being disorganised. And looking at that sequence, I think is very important. I'm not sure why there isn't much historical research. There is historical research, but it tends to be of a different order. It tends to be a political history. So it explains why reforms lean to the left or lean to the right, what political pressures have led to the difference, without asking the hard-nosed question about have these reforms worked. So since we all like slogans, I'm urging here we change from what works to what worked. Here's the final recommendation, and this is perhaps wishful thinking. Many of you will know the research on what are called wicked problems. Wicked problems, I've put a definition up there which we could browse. The key definition is this, that key stakeholders, key players around the problem fundamentally disagree about its nature, and therefore they disagree about any potential solution. Another aspect of wicked problems is that no particular body has any control over a responsibility. A single agency doesn't deal with them. They're usually cross agencies. So the result is that policy policy inspiration, policy solutions aren't going to turn on the new big idea or throwing more cash at the same old problems. It's the nature of the wicked problem in the first place. That's the first priority. The solution, there is some literature on this, and you might find it called the small wins framework, or an even better name for it is the root narrative framework. I try to explain it in the diagram there. So basically you have two narratives of a quite different kind explaining the same the same issue, the same difficulty. What you normally find is that, unlike with the formal definition of wicked problems, there is often a little overlap, little tiny points of consensus between the first narrative and the second narrative. And the small wins framework suggests that it's the evaluator, it's the researcher's job to pinpoint those small areas of overlap, and it's there you can begin to build programs. Perhaps there's time for a brief example. In the UK at the moment, there's a crisis, a wicked problem to do with the massive explosion of mental health problems and the utter failure of the health service to even cope with them. There are two narratives about this massive rise. One says it's to do with the polycrisis in modern society. The wretched nature of modern society is driving more and more people to clinical mental health problems. Narrative B says it's nothing to do with that it's the one stigmatizing label, mental illness, has been replaced by another term, mental health problems. And mental health problems has a quite different feel to it. So the once shameful reference group has become legitimate, and there's even some cachet to admitting to mental health problems. So two completely different narratives which are hard to shift. But is there any overlap between them? There might be if we start to think of the problem is not overdiagnosis, but over-medicalization. So in other words, are these problems really in need of clinical treatment? So maybe we should be celebrating neurodiversity rather than treating it. There might be a sort of an inch of an overlap there on which we could begin to develop programs and evaluate them. Okay, I've finished. So I'd just like to say a few words by way of completion. First of all, thank you for your attention. If you've been interested enough in the lecture, it is possible to read it in full, a big, long 15,000 word paper, and the reference you'll see over to my right. Two further things to say. First of all, thanks to Jade Parker, camerawoman, editor, director, producer of this video. Thank you, Jade. And the last thing to say, and this is true, I'm now about to walk into the sunset because this is my final farewell performance.